Can I go now? I'd like to call to order now our joint special council meeting of the town of Blue Mountains and the town of Collingwood for Wednesday, July 16, 2025. We're going to start by standing and we're going to hear the Toronto Symphony Orchestra play O Canada. Thank you. Everyone, please be seated. Councillor Potts is going to start the meeting off by reading the land acknowledgement.
For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you. Mayor Matrosov, would you like to confirm that all your members are in attendance?
Good evening, Mayor Hamlin. I can confirm that all of our members are in attendance. We have Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Ardell, Councillor Hope, Councillor Porter, and Councillor McKinley here in the chamber, and we have the Deputy Mayor attending virtually.
Thank you. We also have two attending virtually, Councillor Doherty and Councillor McCulloch, and we have the others present in the chambers, which would be Councillor Baines, Councillor Potts, Councillors Jeffrey, Councillors Perry, Councillor Ring, and our Deputy Mayor Fryer. I'm looking now for a mover and a seconder for this motion that the content of the special joint council meeting agenda for Wednesday, July 16th, 2025 be adopted as amended. The amendment is the addition of the appendices for item 5.1, multi-use recreation feasibility assessment results. And we can have people from both councils if you have anybody there. So it was being moved by our Deputy Mayor Fryer.
Mayor Hamlin, we have it seconded by Councillor Ardell.
Thank you. And now, are there any comments or amendments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position during the meeting, please let us know at that time. So I'll just, before I turn this over to staff and consultants, I wanted to say welcome to everyone to this important joint meeting of the Council of Blue Mountains and the Council of the Town in Collingwood. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and I want to thank our colleagues at the Town of Blue Mountain for joining us in this shared conversation. I know I speak on behalf of all members of the Council for the Town of Collingwood, and I'm sure even I could stretch and say Town of Blue Mountain when I say building a new recreation center is a top priority for our communities. I know our residents have waited far too long for better access to aquatics, indoor walking tracks, fitness facilities, arenas, spaces for youth and seniors, as an example. Personally, I'm very committed to moving this project forward, and as we all know, it's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about investing in our health, well-being, and the connection of our community and with our neighbors. So that's why I'm so pleased to have the consultants report before us today together with Council for the Town of Blue Mountains. This will give us information and the momentum we need to start taking meaningful steps forward. The time to build a recreation center is now. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to Director Cubitt, who will introduce the consultants and members of the team at the Town of Blue Mountains. Over to you, Director Cubitt.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. On behalf of my colleagues from the Town of Collingwood and the Collingwood Public Library, I would like to thank both the Collingwood and Town of Blue Mountains councils for your flexibility in accommodating another joint council meeting, and our respective clerks' offices for skillfully tending to tonight's procedural and technical requirements, and to the members of our two communities who have joined us today. Our community members have been very generous with their time and their input and their experiences in helping inform today's report. We appreciate you and your patience as this information was collected, reviewed, and analyzed thoroughly. As a reminder, tonight's meeting is intended to present the results of the Joint Multi-Use Recreation Facility Assessment for information only. Following this, the Town of Collingwood will bring together a Collingwood MRF, Multi-Use Rec Facility Steering Committee, which has been created to provide diverse Collingwood-centric perspectives and advisory recommendations on the outcomes of the consultant's report. The first meeting of this committee is scheduled for July 31st. Following this, individual staff reports from the Town of Collingwood and Town of the Blue Mountains will then be presented to our two councils later this year, addressing next steps. I would also like to take a quick moment to acknowledge that this is Collingwood Council's second meeting this week to discuss potential large-scale community infrastructure projects, and we deeply appreciate the importance and the weight of these discussions. I want to remind our communities that a multi-use recreation facility is DC eligible, and unlike an arts center, would be largely funded through development charges. I would also note the Town of Collingwood also has a little more than $3.2 million in its recreational facility reserve fund. I also wanted to take the opportunity to turn the remarks over to my project partner at TBM, Ryan Gibbons.
Thank you, Ms. Cubitt. Through you, Madam Mayor, just have a few comments. Today is a much anticipated meeting for the Blue Mountains and Collingwood as we review the information gathered and the feedback shared. This meeting is an important step in our process in providing a platform to discuss and enhance our understanding of the joint multi-use recreation feasibility assessment. As Ms. Cubitt said, while no decisions will be made today, our discussions will lay the groundwork for staff recommendations and future decisions. We had originally targeted an earlier delivery date. The report's depth and breadth required a dedicated effort to ensure thoroughness and precision. Our goal has always been to get it right, and today we're pleased to share the results of this extensive analysis. I'd like to extend thanks to the Town of the Blue Mountains project team, partners in Collingwood, and the Colliers team for their efforts on this project. Your collaboration has been an integral part in reaching this point in the process. The MRFA initiative reflects our shared vision of versatile, forward-thinking communities to explore the feasibility of a joint venture of this magnitude. I look forward to the collaborative discussions ahead of us and moving forward on this process. Thank you very much, and back to Ms. Cubitt.
Thank you, Ryan. And with that, I would like to reintroduce our consultants from Collier's Project Leaders to present the study findings. Tonight we have with us Dean Plater, Dr. Kate Graham, and Christina Fasciano. Thank you.
Evening, everyone. Are we queuing up the presentation? Yes, we are. Thank you. So first off, thank you very much. We're very excited to be here this evening. There's been a lot of build up to this. The entire project team has worked very diligently on this to get us to this point in this early stage of planning. If I can go to the next slide, please. So we have a brief agenda. We're going to give you a recap of how we've got to this place where we're at today. We're going to talk about the options for the future. We're going to talk about what is strategic as we're thinking about moving forward. And then we're going to frame up a few of what we think are important next steps to keep some momentum here. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the question that was put to us as the consulting and sort of facilitating team was, is it feasible that the two towns could come together and go forward with the joint use recreational facility? I'm going to jump right to the end of the story. The answer to that question is absolutely. What we'll do here this evening is we're going to take you through the logic that's underneath that, what we've heard from the community, what we've heard from the project teams from both towns, what we've learned from benchmarking similar developments predominantly across Ontario, and then we'll, as I said before, we're going to jump to what we think should happen beyond this point. Next slide, please. So the project scope. When we stepped off on this, we were trying to cover off a lot of ground. So understanding the market, understanding the existing conditions. This is an early stage for this project. This is very early days. We're talking in terms of feasibility. We're not at the point of business case. What we were really trying to understand is the entire environment across the two communities and what was happening, as well as some other things with respect to the libraries and how that might overlay. There was very, very broad form consultation with the public, and Kate's going to talk more about that, I think, on the next slide. We went out and we looked at similar developments that have been built in Ontario communities over the last roughly 10 years. We did a little bit of location analysis. We came up, to be honest, a little bit short on that, but we know generally what is needed and what it would take to be successful with location. We explored financial options and what that could look like. And Karen talked a little bit about the fact that, this could be funded by DC, but there are other potential sources of funding to support here. And we have some thinking that we learned through our benchmarking exercises with governance on projects similar to this as we go forward. Next slide, please. And then we'll turn it over to Kate.
Okay. Good evening, Your Worship, and through to the councils. And I would echo Dean's thanks for the chance to be part of this conversation tonight and to support you with this thinking work. And a thanks to the project teams we've had. It's been a real joy to work with your terrific staffs getting ready for today. So as Dean mentioned, this project started with a clear question about, is it feasible to do something, a multi-use space? Does it make sense to do it together? And the direction, I think very wisely from the project teams, was we need to start by listening to the community. This is something different and new. We've got 2 municipalities, 2 libraries as well with their own communities that they're serving. Let's start with hearing from the public on this idea as a way of informing the report and recommendations and path forward. And so here's what this looked like. We spent several months last year trying to create many avenues. We often talked about spokes on the wheel, kind of a central set of questions, but many different ways that residents and community members could engage in the process. Here's what that looked like. We did 2 surveys. These were not randomly selected statistical surveys. These were anyone who is interested in sharing their thoughts is welcome to do so. Your teams did a great job of promoting these through billboards and mailers and things like that. We had a longer survey and then a shorter one that was targeted to youth with about 3,500 responses. We then, in person, in a synchronous way, went to places where people are. So large community gatherings where you already had large groups of residents. We showed up at those events. Sometimes it was just promoting the project. Sometimes it was answering questions. Sometimes people showed up wanting to talk very specifically about their pickleball needs or what they would like to see in aquatic facilities, etc. We were ready there to record that feedback and build it into the process. We then did interviews with people who are potential high interest, high users of these spaces or who had a particular vantage point on the project, and then invited in focus groups. These were a series of virtual events aimed to be as accessible as possible, organized around specific communities, and then a general one for those who maybe couldn't make the date or wanted to talk in a more general way. And then finally, there were groups who invited us in. They heard about the process, and often, some work went into, they had a position that they wanted to communicate on the project, and so there was an opportunity to do that. And then the ongoing piece is continual discussion with other communities about what they're learning, about what they're thinking, including some neighbors for this project. And that was sort of ongoing throughout the project. So what did we hear from this? If we could go to the next slide, whoever's managing the magic of this, thank you very much. I know you've seen this in the 35-page version of this in the written report, and we did talk about this when we got together last in the fall. But I think it's worth iterating. What was the theme of what the public communicated through those many avenues? Number one, and there's a reason it's number one, a very clear, widespread, deep level of support for more recreation amenities in all categories. Sometimes we are brought in on projects like this, and there's sort of an imbalance. There's one or two things that people are looking for, and you hear it over and over and over again, and you don't hear about much else. That was not the case here. From aquatics to ice, to courts to turf, to additional capacity for uses, the mayor already mentioned things like walking tracks, gathering places for seniors, for youth. In all of those categories, we heard a lot of need, almost an urgency to it. And part of this, I think, is about the pace of growth. Part of it, we heard often about the unique nature and the quality of life amenities in your communities. You know this, of course, very well. People choose the Blue Mountains in Collingwood for a reason. The brand is very closely tied to this lifestyle, recreational amenities, ability to choose a community that you're very connected to the water and to recreational activities. And I think that builds perhaps even a higher level of demand than what we may see in other communities. You've also experienced a lot of in-migration, people coming from larger urban centers to both communities with a really dramatic pace of growth over the last few years. And often those residents come with a high awareness of the kinds of amenities and facilities they may have enjoyed in larger urban centers, or maybe they are sport families who are used to traveling to different facilities. They see these multi-use spaces, they know about them, they're familiar with them, and they have a high desire to do that. It's also, as you know, been a topic of conversation for many years, so there's a bit of pent-up urgency. So all of that wrapped together to put a bow on it, we would say that there's a widespread deep support in the community, as I suspect you know, and high expectations to deliver. And we took that last piece really seriously. We don't want to add a higher expectation ahead of making key decisions along the way, and we'll get back to that when we get to the recommendations piece. Second thing that we heard from the public, people know the communities are growing. This is not just something that's found in statistics. People experience it, that from lines at the grocery store to traffic. They also are feeling it in the pressure that it's putting on facilities. And importantly, we heard with this, I don't know, maybe I'm saying it too strongly, but like almost an underlying anxiety that came along with it about what that would mean for the future of recreation spaces that already are well loved and we heard about ice times early in the morning and the competition between groups and so on. So what will continued growth mean if there isn't a plan to add capacity over time? We heard this over and over and over again, from focus groups to interviews to in the surveys. Number three, a clear question that this entire exercise hung on is, does a multi-use space make sense? And again, compared to maybe we just build a pool or an ice rink, a space that's designed to do one thing and it does that one thing very well. What's the general sentiment in the public? And from, again, across interviews, across focus groups, and the survey is the easiest place to quantify it. It was a 5-to-1 ratio of preferring the multi-use space. Often this was coupled, again, with people's own experiences. I myself, I happen to use one of these spaces all the time. My daughter has a basketball lesson. There's an open air walking track above, so you've got different uses. I can drop off my library books on the way out the door. These multiple opportunities for everyone in the family, or to be able to enjoy many things all under one roof, has an appeal that appears to already be well known and well understood by residents in both communities. This preference, you'll know in the part of the report where we captured the survey findings in particular, we disaggregated it by community, as both councils, I think very understandably, will be particularly interested in what your residents had to say. This preference for multi-use was shared across both communities. We have a little caveat here at the end, location matters. We know that there are a number of big decisions ahead, what's in the space, where the space goes, which municipality it's in. There are a number of really important decisions that we are not quite at yet. And so this preference for multi-use space, I would say, was often coupled with, but it still needs to be close and convenient. You know, everyone wants these spaces to be within a reasonable distance from wherever they are. So we heard that connection between multi-use and location as a bit of a caveat often when this came up. Number 4, another threshold question. What do we think about this idea of a multi-use space? We're very used to, in Ontario, and 444 municipalities, very common to build sort of single municipal facilities. We do this all the time. This idea of a collaborative effort is much less common, although not unheard of. And we gave you some examples in the benchmarking of where this model has worked quite well. But what do we think about this idea of a multi-municipality, 2 or potentially more, with 2 libraries, potentially other partners involved as well? And generally the response to that was one of support. And again, I think it's something that's, I imagine is important as you're thinking about what this looks like, to know that residents generally were supportive because it was seen sort of instinctively as being an avenue for building something potentially of a larger scale and more efficiently than either municipality could do on their own. So residents would say, yes, sounds like a great idea, especially if it means that we could do A, B, C that we might not be able to do if it was just a facility serving the residents of one municipality. And then the 5th piece, there were a number of things that where there were tensions or dissonance or kind of different opinions that emerged in our conversations. And these are the big picture strategic conversations that, you know, we raised in the report, knowing that further conversations needed. So for example, one of them was about who is this facility for? Are we building something that is tailored to drawing in tourists and visiting groups where we can host meets and competitions and draw people in from a larger region, which of course lends itself to larger amenities, a different kind of scale? Or are we building something that's specifically for our residents and we're not designing it for those special events and otherwise? So thinking through where the facility is and who it's for will be some of the important work ahead. We are certainly not here to tell you what the right answer is, but the report tries to outline some of those considerations, knowing that those are things that we'll need to grapple with going forward. All right, so if we can move to the next slide. And one more, so options. So what does all of this mean? Well, as I said at the outset, sometimes we hear a really strong preference for 1 or 2 things. We heard almost an urgency on almost every focus group, almost every category of amenity that we talked to residents about. But because it's nice to see them in a prioritized order, here they are. This was based on a couple of things. Number 1, both municipalities have already done terrific strategic work, as you know, in your parks and recreation master plans, right? The framework for well-being for Collingwood, in the Blue Mountains, the leisure activities plan, where you've taken a look at what are the standards for how many tennis courts, how many ice pads, etc., for the population size. How do we expect those will change? What are some of those gaps? So we started because this effort was just looking at the idea of a multi-use space. We thought it was important to build that on the existing work that you've been doing. So in both communities, you've already identified that you have additional capacity needs in these categories. So that was kind of consideration number 1 in building this list. Number 2 was based on how frequently residents raised what they were looking for and the sort of urgency that was expressed. We felt all of these amenities are warranted in the following order. But again, I don't want to make it seem like one one was way more important. All of these were expressed as being important and where there's a need and a demand. So aquatics, heard lots about safety in particular, being so close to the water. Sometimes an expectation expressed like every kid should be able to get swimming, especially in communities that are so close to the water, those kinds of things. So this was a top priority. It was raised very frequently on the survey, came up in focus groups, interviews, etc. For high users of aquatic facilities, the desire for a 50-meter pool was raised often. This is a competition. Could be, for Olympic qualifiers and so on, for elite training athletes, a space that there aren't many of in Ontario. Many saw this being an opportunity, a strategic opportunity that your communities would be well suited for. But again, it gets back to that strategic consideration about who are we building this for. But the potential for a 50-meter pool came up often. Second, ice pads. I know this is an ongoing discussion. This is a high needs. We have growing demand, but also lots of very practical issues right now with booking times and so on. So ice pads came up often. Courts of all varieties. Courts was something that was raised often with very particular dimensions, courts, indoor, outdoor, all of the categories, again, we heard an interest. And then finally, the range of ideas around library and community spaces. This is, many felt, what would really bring the space to life. The ability to come in and enjoy a library program or, stop at a cafe, go on that walking track while a kid is at a lesson, be able to have sort of open gym spaces that could be used for anything from cooking classes to yoga sessions, etc. These sorts of uses that will create those moments and those draws that bring residents in and also allow for family members, for example, if someone's coming in for a hockey game or a swimming lesson, gives those opportunities for others to enjoy as well. So the long story short of this is in all categories, and your recreation master plans already articulate this, and with the pace of growth, you've got a need, and many of those needs potentially can be met or come closer to being met through the creation of a multi-use space. All right, next slide, and I'll turn things back to Dean.
Okay. So what do we need? What would actually be required to put this thing together with some of that programming that Kate was just talking about? So there's a couple of things in here that are really important. One, ideally centralized between the two communities to find a bit of balance for the community members on both, coming from both of the towns. So central is important. The other thing that we've been thinking about is ideally it would be a municipally owned parcel of land. We've not yet come up with something, but we've been talking with both of the towns on that, just to overall reduce the project cost. Because if there's an acquisition of land, it's going to stack onto the overall cost of the project. Accessibility is really important, especially with a recreational facility. Ideally, want to be within a 30-minute radius and have access to transit, bikes, and cycling and walking. Craigleith came up many times during consultation, given the geography and how that sort of tucks in between the two communities. Potentially a solid location going into Craigleith. What we learned from our benchmarking and looking at other facilities that had some of the things that Kate was just talking about with the pool and whatnot, generally that would get the facility up into the area of around roughly 100,000 square feet. And what we saw was a spread between 10 and 22 acres, depending on what the other municipalities were looking to do. Some of them had lots of fields outside. They wanted nature trails. But those details would get resolved later, based on, what's available for land that's out there commercially, and how do we want to program the facility and the things that would be happening outside. Then the last thought here, generally, assuming that the project is going to go forward, the communities are going to come together here. These things are generally governed by a memorandum of understanding. There could be some, sensitive things that we don't want, the landholders to get an understanding and, prices start going up. So generally we see these things are governed by an MOU across the parties. Next slide. So sources of funding. And Director Cubitt sort of alluded to some of this stuff. This type of a project is eligible for DC, so that's a good news story. way up in the top right here, we see some construction cost estimates. Before I get to the funding, let's talk a little bit about the expenses. We see a pretty broad range of construction costs. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the programming within the facility. Pools are expensive. Basketball courts, not so much. So once we get to the detailed programming of the facility, there'll be more accuracy with the level of costing. But right now, we've seen a range anywhere from about $670 to almost $1,200 per square foot. Again, we're waiting on a federal budget, which would be helpful to understand, what some additional funding is going to look like. Our experience, regardless of the change of the federal government, there will be money available for infrastructure. Right now, today, we have the Community Sport Recreational Infrastructure Fund up to $10 million. Canada Community Building Fund. There was $358 million allocated to Ontario. And then there's a series of other things. And then down at the bottom, an important line in all of this, we do anticipate for a rec center that funding would come from community members as well. So community fundraising, we were anticipating donations between $2 to $5 million. So all that to say, there's a bit of volatility. There's a bit of unknown. Volatility is the wrong words. There are some unknowns with the funding because we're waiting on a federal budget, but we do anticipate there will be more federal money that'll be coming on the table once the budget gets resolved. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it back to Kate.
Okay. So one of the challenges of this process, and I suspect you feel this even more than we as the team supporting you through this did, is that there are some threshold questions that need to be answered before a lot of other things can be determined. Threshold questions including, are you going to build a multi-use space, and would you like to do it together? If the answer to those questions is yes, it creates an opportunity for a variety of different governance arrangements. We don't want to presuppose that that's where this will end, right? That's very much this report and the recommendations lay out a path for you. We are recommending that you do a joint multi-use facility, that you open it up to other partners, and we lay out, Dean we will conclude with this as the main, the punchline of the report, but it lays out a very clear path for how you would do this by empowering a joint group to make decisions and a process that you would walk through. Before we get to that point though, we did want to make sure there's an awareness that there are a lot of different ways that these facilities can be run. We gave you many comparator examples. The one that we highlighted and with intentionality was the example of the TransAlta project in Spruce Grove, not necessarily for the facility as much as for the governance arrangement. So this facility is co-owned by 3 municipalities. They created a separate corporation. In Alberta, legislation is a little different. In Ontario, we would call this a municipal services corporation. They have a board of 9 members. 3 of them are appointed from each municipality. It includes a combination of elected officials and members of the public, depending on population size. So they have created a separate body that overcomes some of those issues of 2 organizations that may have, you've got different from labor relations to risk considerations, legal liability, the physical location of where the space is. Think about the libraries, for example, in the Public Libraries Act and where the libraries, all of these details, when there are more than one municipal partner involved and more than one organizational partner, needs a solution that fits that. So as the report articulates, I think in this section, the most important is form follows function. Should you decide to proceed with a joint facility, you have a lot of options. One municipality could own it and the other could be a partner in some way, as an owner, as a tenant. You could jointly come up with a way to own this. There are a few examples of that. You could jointly own a corporation that owns and operates this facility, example being the Spruce Grove, and others. And I know there are other permutations of all of these things that you may have in place from municipal utilities and so on, or a third party. So there are also lots of examples where a third party, the YMCA is a popular one, where the municipalities partner with an organization, sometimes as an owner, sometimes as the operator. That will be important in terms of what the capital looks like. Really important. Where the location is and if that's already a municipally owned parcel of land is, of course, also going to be an important both governance and financial dimension of the project. Then the operation. Let's imagine you've got a joint space, 2 or more municipalities involved, libraries, other partners potentially. The staffing, the operations, who is determining things like the parking arrangements, access into the facility, whether it's fees and service, those sorts of things need to be managed. So again, you have a lot of options here. This could be something that one municipality takes on, could be something that a corporation jointly owned takes on, could be something that a third party takes on, or there are examples where different parts of the space involve different arrangements. So for example, if there was ice pads, maybe that has a different arrangement for both for users as well as for who's managing that space. So all of these this is probably a frustratingly vague way of saying you have a lot of options on the table that all hang on this question of, do you want to do this together? And what would you like to be in this space if you're choosing to do it together? And are there other partners potentially involved? Those are things you want to sort out and be crystal clear on upfront because you do have a lot of choices that then you live with and need to sustain the project over the long term. So spending that time up front on thinking these through is important. The final piece, and this is not something that needs to be top of mind right now, but will come up and potentially sooner than we may think, but is who are the mix of partners and what does their engagement in the space look like? So in multi-use spaces where there are many organizations involved, it's quite common that those organizations want and expect and can play a really important role in animating the space and making joint decisions about, from shared staffing areas to excuse me, my apologies. Things like the security in the parking lot at night. What are the norms of hours that spaces are open? All of those things, the various partners in the space will rightfully have perspectives on and need some vehicle for being able to work with the owners and operators of the facility on to ensure that the space is animated and works well and that you've got a group of happy partners that are working very synchronously together. So there's sort of layers to the governance consideration. Up front, what the report really highlights and underscores for you is start with those threshold decisions of who is involved. Are you committed to working on this together? Do you want to open this up to others? And then think about those questions like ownership, which will affect the initial capital costs, but also just want to make sure that we know there's also other governance considerations when it comes to the operating of the space potentially down the road. All right, next slide. And one more. Thank you. All right, so we're getting to the punchline here, and then we will open it up for questions and discussion. I'm going to walk you through the scenarios that we looked at as a team, and then Dean will walk you through the recommendations, and then we'll open it up. So even at a very big picture, I know we got into like security in the parking lot and so on there for a second. Let's go back up to the threshold question. Would you like to build a multi-use facility together? The options that we looked at in sort of big buckets, and there are permutations within these. Number one is you could opt to not do this, right? You could say we don't need a new facility. There isn't a desire for this or a need for financial capacity for all kinds of reasons, from deciding not to indecision in lots of cases. It's not the right time or not the right moment. So no new facility is always an option. Keep things as they are. A second option is maybe it makes sense to proceed as separate municipalities and partners, build facilities, single-use facilities that meet the most acute needs. So this could look like, and could involve some coordination, a pool in one municipality and some additional investments in ice next door, and we're going to coordinate that, but you could pursue separate single-use facilities and coordinate or not to some extent on that. That's also always an option. Number three, do something jointly. Pursue a joint multi-use facility that is built with the residents of both, and again, always with the door open at this initial stage. If there's another municipality or other partners that you decided to engage in this, build a facility that is scaled for the needs of the residents and what we understand as in the total collection of amenities in those communities to fill the most needs that we can with the collective resources that we have. And then the fourth is do separate multi-use facilities. This would be the grandest of the four. Do a multi-use space in both municipalities municipalities that there's a desire for that. So in short form, number one on this list was very quickly discarded. It was completely at odds with what we heard from residents. It's not in sync with your existing strategic documents. No new facility does not solve any of the problems that led you to this exploration in the first place. The second one to be dropped is the fourth one. Separate multi-use facilities. You are both high growth communities, but the scale of the population and the scale of growth we felt could be accommodated with one multi-use space. In addition, the efficiency of doing something together rather than separately, of course, is significant. You know better than most. We also live in times where a lot is changing, from even within this year, right? Changes internationally means changes to everything from supply chains to costs. We live in times where there is this uncertainty. And so the idea of recommending to you that you do separate things did not make sense to us either. We spent a fair bit of time with those two middle options. The challenge of coordinating is not to be underestimated. Deciding what you would like to do together and finding ways to make those decisions in concert as partners. Again, we don't want to understate the significant time and energy that goes into doing that well. And this would involve financial coordination. It would involve legal coordination. It would involve thinking through, some of those intricate dimensions with the libraries, for example. You have all of this expertise, but corralling it and pursuing something together jointly, and again, with that even complexity adding possibility of other partners in our recommendations, as you will know, we recommend sending an expression of seeing if there's a more formal invitation to others to see if there is interest in being a part of it. Coordinating that is not simple, and potentially it's a little bit slower and a little bit more difficult, but we also felt it leads to a better project and one that is of a more significant size and scale and value than might be able to be accomplished on your own. So for those reasons, in the report, you will know we identify a number of reasons why this third option is ultimately our recommendation, doing a joint multi-use facility. Clear shared desire from residents and a desire for a multi-use space that was shared across both communities. The geography, we included probably things are even more detailed than needed, but like isochrones of the existing travel times for your existing recreation facilities, for example. The norms of sharing across the municipal boundary are already well present and documented. Third, the efficiency and the costs. And I think most importantly, this is one we maybe don't give as much credence in the report as is warranted, but the strategic alignment piece is essential. Both municipalities identifying at the same time in your existing strategic documents a desire for a multi-use space, both having potentially financial and other resources to contribute, both having a collaborative spirit, even this somewhat unusual but wonderful opportunity for councils to come together and make decisions. This is out of the norm, but your willingness to do this together, we felt really supported this idea of a joint facility, even if it's a little bit more unusual. For all of those reasons, our report recommends clearly and unequivocally to you that we feel there is a case, and a very good case, for doing a joint multi-use facility between these two communities, again with an openness to other partners. So that was the thought process after all of that work and analysis had been complete. These four options examined, number 2 and number 3 both having merit, but ultimately landing on number 3. I'll close on this and then pass it to Dean for the more detailed recommendations that we are leaving with you. We fully recognize that these decisions is so tempting. It would be wonderful if we could pop into a calculator, here's the population growth and here's what we have, and like, boom, out pops a blueprint. That's not how this works, as you know. From communities across the country, different size facilities in different size of populations, communities make very different choices about what they need at a moment in time. Some of this is about the data and the analysis, and some of this is about the really important role that you play as leaders in these communities, knowing what your communities need right now. So we have laid out for you a path to be able to get to this outcome, but never wanting to presume some of those key decisions about, do you want to work together, and who may you want to engage as well along the way. So that's why this conversation and your openness to sitting with this idea of working together is so important. So thanks very much for the chance to share about this, and I'll pass it back to Dean for our recommendations.
Okay, Kate. So what you will see here, the thinking that's actually underneath all of this is we understand that the councils need a lot of control around things like this. So the things that we're going to recommend here are done very progressively, which provides a number of gates in the process. So before, jumping into, I'll just throw an arbitrary $100 million number out. This process for the balance of the planning phase here has a number of gates which would allow either council to sort of off-ramp if things don't go as you would hope. So at the first stage of all of this, the collaboration on commitment. Well, obviously, after this meeting here, the councils are going to have to go off on their own and make decisions about, is this the path that we would like to pursue jointly together? And I imagine that'll be lots of conversation by both councils. A lot of thinking will have to go into that. But in order to proceed, we'd need a commitment from both councils. Assuming that commitment is provided, then ideally we would imagine some level of a memorandum of understanding that sort of frames up like, how is this going to work going forward? It's going to get more complicated the deeper we get into this. So the memorandum of understanding will frame up the different pieces such as committees and membership, how decisions are going to be made, potentially the cost sharing for the next stages of the project, how information is going to be moving around. And there's a bunch of other things that would go in there as well, but an MOU would really be the governing instrument for the two towns to come together for this next piece. Then following that, the feasibility study, as we've been sort of presenting it here today and delivered, that's the first bit of work. In project management, there's a theory called progressive elaboration. So at the next stage, as we get to the business case, things become clearer, the data becomes more accurate, we can quantify and qualify things a little bit better. Specifics around, the target capital budget, the detailed programming of what goes in the building, not at a high level as we've done here. More around what does operating and governance look like, recommendations, potentially some outreach to potential partners, and ideally to be able to afford the capital and the operating pieces, a concept design, as well as a functional program. The functional program is required in order to get to what we will call a Class D costing, which is a far more accurate number than the benchmarks that we've provided. Then, in sort of our last pillar here, ideally levels of governance committee, right? So a MRFA committee, lead the development of the business case, work with the consultants, the architects, engineers, whatever we need, work on the scope and prioritize what actually goes into the building. Kate talked a little bit about some of the things, but there are, at the next level, there's far more detail about what needs to go in there. And then ideally make a recommendation back to the councils and oversee future procurement. So beyond a business case that would get approved as a gate in the process, then you would have to, work through design and then actually work through construction. And there's a lot of moving bits around the procurement of those things. So that's what we see as the next steps here. And we're going to jump to the next slide, which says questions. And we're going to open it up for some thoughts and conversations and questions.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Mayor Matrosov, shall we start with you? I can't see your council, so I would ask you to please identify and ask people to speak when they're ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin, and thank you to the presenters. And what we'll do is I'll keep an eye on the screen in case the Deputy Mayor raises his virtual hand. And at this point in time, I'll look around the chamber and see if we have questions for clarification from members of our Town of Blue Mountains Council. So I'm looking around the room and I see a hand from Councillor Porter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and I appreciate the presentation, the material provided. Thank you very much, and also all of the sources of potential funding, which may or may not be successful. So I'm sort of always about the numbers, the cost, and I was most interested in looking at the operating performer that was put forward. Because even if you had all the possible grants and everything, when the building is built, it's the operating costs that you live with annually. And just looking at this, I think it would have been nice to have an operating performer that was a bit more and maybe in line as to what we were looking at, more like for like. Alberta certainly has different tax and even the, taxes and as you build into things. But I'm sort of looking at, even if I estimated it doesn't have a library, but it would look like probably a 2.5 on the tax levy at our current annual budget now. And that's about 2.4 million. That would be operating costs, because your operating costs are going to exceed what your revenue is based on what I see here. So I'm just a bit concerned about that. And I think, I appreciate having been involved in the development of business cases for basically in the healthcare system, but I would have hoped there would be a little bit more information about what the post-build costs would be to enable a more informed decision on how we progress, because that's the cost you're going to carry for years and years and it doesn't go away. Thank you.
So Mayor Hamlin, I'll look to the presenters if they would like to address any of the questions that were contained in that commentary. If there's any response.
Sure, I could speak to that. So at this stage of the project, which is really the early feasibility, when we develop the operating pro forma, we don't actually know what's in the building yet. We have a general idea of what the programming will look like. To really understand what does a subsidy need to look like to carry a facility like this, that's where a business case is needed. So again, it's very early days. We're trying to determine directionally what it might look like, but the level of granularity that you're talking about would have to be done during a business case when we have further details about exactly the programming potential revenue. We're not quite there yet.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to go to Councillor Hope next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much to the presenters. And I think this is very exciting. I do think this is an excellent direction. And I understand we can always have more details, that's for sure. And on that note, pardon me if I missed something here, but I didn't, through you, Madam Mayor, I didn't really hear how much money there was in the Town of Blue Mountains Library Fund and its recreation fund that would go toward this. Did I miss something? And I know we have the library board well represented here. So through you, Madam Mayor, if we could have that information repeated, if I missed it, or would appreciate knowing what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So the town has identified a multi-use rec facility in the DC background. We don't have a dedicated reserve fund for recreation facilities outside of capital replacement and maintenance. So it's a little bit different than Collingwood scenario, but we do have the DC. We did identify within that, I believe it was approximately $80 million. I'm not certain exactly how much is funded in that today, but we can get that number back for council.
Follow up, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. So yes, that would be very helpful to have that information, 80 million. It's quite a consideration, but also in the library fund. We heard Collingwood's rec center was at 3.2 million. Seems to me we're somewhere between 2 and 3 million for the library. Thank you, if you could clarify.
Through Madam Mayor, I don't have that number in front of me, but whenever we do bring the recommendation report to council for consideration, we'll be sure to have those financials with us.
Okay, thank you. And we will have to move on to other questions to allow time for the Collingwood Council to ask their questions as well. But I do recognize that we do have our CEO of the library in the room. So if there's any additional information that needs to be shared, I'll make sure that I look back to staff, both staff, before we move forward. So with that, I'm going to go to Councillor Maxwell next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just got to refresh my memory here. So we were talking about 22 acres in the Craigleith area. Is that correct? Then I got to follow up right after.
Yeah.
Look to the presenters.
So yeah, I can speak to that. So I believe the number, so we provided a range between 10 and 22, depending on the ultimate programming for the facility.
And the location?
The location, yes, was Craigleith, which would be central.
Okay, so here's my follow-up question then. So when you're developing the MOU between Collingwood and the town of Blue Mountains, there's going to be a lot of lost opportunities here for this 22 acres or 10 acres or whatever it is on future taxation and DCs. So I'm just wondering, what will the town of Blue Mountains contribution be towards this facility in the MOU? How would that be figured out? Thank you.
Would you like to respond in the context of this point in the process? Because you've mentioned that this is a very early stage and MOUs are would be considered later.
Well, I'm not sure that we can answer that question at this point because that would be packaged within the MOU. The terms and the consideration, the contributions of the parties, those are all elements of the MOU. So I think it might be premature to try to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just look, we'll go to Councillor McKinley next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to offer some clarity, though, for our library, for the town the Blue Mountains Public Library. For our development charges, we have about $3.1 million for the library portion of a development charge. So that means only the library expansion could that be spent on, not on a pool. So we have to be very clear. This is why I believe that Colliers has so kindly put that there's a lot of further complexities to unravel on that. Plus, as through you, Madam Mayor, I'll just ask or clarify too. So 10 to 22 acres in Craigleith area that we don't have. I think that's the end of that's about the roundabout of it, right? Nobody has 10 to 22 acres in Craigleith, right? That we identified.
I'll look to the presenters if they want to respond in the context of the location.
I would actually defer that to Karen and Ryan to speak to what the towns have in the way of land holdings.
Hey, Director Gibbons.
Thank you, through Madam Mayor. I'm happy to start, and if Ms. Cubitt has anything she'd like to add, that would be great. But at this point in time, we have not identified any property. So we identified there was strategy behind presenting it the way that we did. That the scale of the property that would be required is that 10 to 22 acres. What that looks like moving forward, if we choose to do that, I think it was identified in the presentation. Ideally, it would be municipally owned land, but to date, we haven't identified any land that would be suitable. Thank you.
Okay, and Mayor Hamlin, I think I'd like to keep the flow of the conversation. So Director Gibbons has handed off to Ms. Cubitt too, Director Cubitt, if she would like to add anything to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will note that we do have a property acquisitions committee here in the town of Collingwood that is sort of constantly taking a look at property acquisition opportunities for various projects. I concur we have not identified any one parcel of land at any one location that would serve this specific purpose at this point, but also acknowledge that we do need to have a bit more direction from our councils with respect to partners. Are we partnering together? Are we looking for additional partners? Are we doing this separately? Again, all of that will inform the land and the location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Mayor Hamlin, I do have a question from the Deputy Mayor, and then I'll go to Councillor Ardell here after the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you as chairing from our side. Just a question for the presenters. Concrete next steps. We're talking a lot in theory, and I know it's very, very early days. We've done a lot of research and development, and Ms. Cubitt just made an excellent point about we're not even sure if we're looking at one facility, two facilities, joint facility. So what we all know that recreation and a multi-use is needed. what would be the concrete next steps we're looking at? Do you dive directly into land identification and acquisition? Do you look at complexities of funding in the capital side? So what would be I guess my question would be, what would be the concrete next steps, knowing that there's a need or a will to go ahead?
So if I could address that, ideally resolve an agreement between the parties. Well, have both councils agree that they want to proceed together. That's really the first step. Resolve terms of an agreement. How is this going to work? Like, what does the governing look like? Where's the decision making? Then really the most important bit here is to get the business case together to understand what the financial obligations would be to the parties, both from the capital perspective as well as the operating perspective. This building will be around for 50 or 100 years. What is the commitment from both of the towns going to look like to operate this thing after that capital money's gone into it? So the business case is really key to help the councils make the decision to proceed.
Thank you. Just Madam Mayor, just as a quick follow-up. So that's what I was trying to get at. So you said we do the memorandum that we want to proceed together, but shouldn't the business case come first?
No.
Of what? So we know what we're making a decision on?
No, you put the memorandum together to enable the staff to be able to work on that business case jointly together. Who's going to be doing what? What does that look like? We call it a MOU. It's like terms of reference. What does the project team have the authority to do? When do they need to come to council? What do things look like? The MOU is the light touch. The business case is the heavier piece.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And the final comment that we have is from Councillor Ardell.
Thank you, and through the chair, Madam Mayor. And I always go to a business case first, and yes, we need an MOU. But, if this is going to be 100,000, and I'm looking at our population bases, Collingwood's probably roughly 27,000. We're not even at 10,000 yet. And a lot of business cases, everybody wants to go by our assessment base. And yes, we're heavily in assessment, but we don't have the population. And so when I look at things, I look at numbers, and the same as Councillor Porter. I just want to make sure we have the practicality of making sure this is really going to work with a business plan and the funding. And, then I know you have to do your MOU before you start going into your funding. But in your grants and different things like that, because there's, as you had listed, there was several funding, the feds, the province, all the other targets that we would need to meet, but I would not want it as an assessment base on our part here at TBM. I looked at with your population, you would have 2/3 and we would have 1/3. And if we're going to have to throw in some land, I don't know where we're going to get the land from, and how much our land is worth as opposed to your lands. So those are just some of my questions that have followed with our deputy mayor's questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just look to the presenters if they would like to add any comments there.
I can try. So the MOU would delineate the responsibilities of the parties financially going forward, whether that's on a population basis or however that looks. And these things will all get resolved, like the contribution of land. What does that look like? Well, you would ideally, when we get into these things, you hire an independent third party to provide, a market appraisal. So I caution everybody that at this stage of the project, we're trying to understand are the two towns wanting to come together? There will be a million details that need to get resolved here. Having an MOU, having a committee in place to be able to work through that, all of these things can be resolved with time. And, coming all the way back to the beginning, sort of in the opening remarks to this, what was said was, this is a very feasible project for the the two towns to come together. These details will all be resolved, and there would be controls in place to make sure that, nobody's getting the short end of the stick. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Director Gibbons.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just to try and help provide a little bit of clarity, and Mr. Plater, feel free to correct me if I'm not correct here. The MOU is speaking about the next step in the process. So for us to go forward, if we choose, if both of our councils provide us direction to go forward to the next phase of this, which is that business case or functional programming, that this MOU that we're talking about is how will we work together to produce that? I think whenever we have that information, if we decide to go forward together, there's another key decision point after we have all of that information. If we choose to go forward beyond that and build something together, there's going to be a more significant formal agreement that will outline all of those different details that we're talking about here today. So I just share that, and hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity about the MOU and what stage we're at. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our members of council, and we've heard from our staff as well. And Mayor Hamlin, I would circle back my own commentary. I would circle back to what Councillor McKinley had said, that I understand from the presenters that first there needs to be a will and an interest, which is why we're all together today, and then to hear from the community, which is what we're hearing resoundingly, that there's an interest for this. There's an identification already that it needs to be in the Craigleith area. The geography of 21 kilometers of shoreline on the Blue Mountains, and your geography on your side, and then how far up we go on the mountains, it makes a lot of logic sense, especially with the population base, both with the west of Collingwood and the east of the Blue Mountains, to be in that location. But we don't have an infinite supply of potential land there. Maybe there's a private piece and a private donor out there that won't come forward until they know we're looking. But I would, to the presenters, I would ask then how far into the time investment of our staff, the cost of hiring you to continue with helping us through this process. At what point do we insert that prior as part of the commentary from the Deputy Mayor about needing the business plan? It would be a non-starter if we can't find a suitable piece of land. So at what point in that process that you've outlined would we have to stop and say, is there a potential piece of land that would meet the needs of what we're hearing from the communities as well as councils?
I can answer that. So we could interject that into the process at any point. We could make that up front. When we talk in terms of business case, the process and the outcomes of a business case are often different as we work from client to client. So we could do something progressively. We could do a preliminary market assessment, see what's out there for land. To be honest, a couple of weeks ago, I did a bit of digging on my own, and there were a few commercial sites available that would meet the need. We didn't bake that into the report. I was just curious, how plausible is this? So I suppose the answer to this question is, if there is a desire to assess the market for available land, we could do that at any point, or the staff could do it. I mean, it doesn't have to be the consultant. Staff could do it as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin, for allowing us the opportunity to ask her questions first.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it to our council now. And I see, CEO, did you want to ask a question first? Then I'll go to you, Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. I just had a bit of contextual pieces that might help with the questions. In the project, the requirements that had been set out for Collingwood, the highest level included reviewing the feasibility and sustainability of a multi-use recreation facility for the town of Collingwood that could be done in conjunction with local municipalities as a regional center to optimize the needs of several communities. So there's a recommendation here looking at one community, which is the town of Blue Mountains, and it is a viable partner. It's not our only viable partner, so there could be others. And I think if you look through the report in more detail, it talks about the potential to have those other conversations as well. I'm also very interested in what will actually be in the center, because I think that does inform the choice of municipal partners, and I would want that to happen quickly in the next steps. And I know there were some comments on whether that was next or not, but I did want to add that local context as far as Collingwood requirements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. One of my questions was the same, in line with the Deputy Mayor from Town of Blue Mountains, so that was answered. I'll go back to the beginning and look, understanding, and this will be for the consultants and staff, but knowing that we need to figure out first if we are going to do this together. So what I would ideally like to know is timeline. Obviously, we received this report tonight. We're going to be providing, and this information is going to go to our steering committee, who we're looking forward to getting their input back, just to figure out and find out if it's going to be something we're going to do together. What do we see as a timeline to have that information to come back, and then the next steps of a timeline going from there? So is this something that we're looking at, like a 1 month window to understand, are we going to work together? Like, what is the timeline that we foresee in the future? Thanks.
Thank you. Dean, is this something you'll speak to?
I kind of think it should be Ryan and Karen with respect to timelines here, because I could take a shot. I imagine that, motions would be coming forward to both councils as sort of next steps on proceed or not.
Okay, Director Cubitt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Hamlin. I'm only reluctant to make a suggestion because I don't want to put any restrictions around the steering committee and or make an assumption on how much time they might need to provide us their input. So we know we've got one meeting scheduled. I don't want to tell them they only have that one meeting. So I want to give them a little bit of runway to work with that. But beyond that, I think I'll ask Ryan if he agrees. We've committed to being back with a staff report by the end of this year. We don't want to see this go months and months and months out. I'm reluctant to give you a specific time, because I want to give the steering committee the time that they need. Thank you.
Yes, follow up.
So just to follow up, and thank you for that. I think the important part's going to be is that's quite a long time, I think, just to figure out if we're going to do this together. So I guess my ask would be that it's for the process to maybe move a little quicker to get it to that point, and then we can take the time we need in the next steps. But I think it's quite important that we get something back in a fairly shorter timeline, and I think it shouldn't take too long for us to figure out if we are going to do this together. I think it's so that's quite important. So that was on top of mind for me. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. Through you, if I might, to Kate Graham. Just following up, first of all, as a comment, I'm delighted and surprised, actually, that there was such enthusiasm in both communities for this, and that's encouraging news. But a question to you about cross-indexing, if you will, level of support for a communal, if you will, MRF in one community, and time traveled, because you had mentioned I think that you had looked at that. So the question is, if it's 7 minutes to get to the hypothetical MRF, what their support is, if it's 12 or if it's 15 minutes. For both residents in both communities, does the support for the MRF drop? Because I just want to be sure and comfortable that proceeding with this, that both communities and their residents understand the potential travel time and what it might take, because it'd be unfortunate to get down the road and find out there was an erosion of support based on distance traveled or needed to be traveled. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that or if you can produce any information to that effect sometime later down the road.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So through your worship to Councillor Baines, thank you for the question. We certainly could crosstab. We ask questions like, how long do you currently travel, comfort level with travel? There were differences. The norms on current travel, as we may expect, were a bit longer in the town of the Blue Mountains than they were in Collingwood, for example. My guess, though, this is maybe a more of a qualitative than a quantitative response. My guess is that it would depend a lot on the user. In the focus groups, we heard quite different norms. So the hockey community versus the tennis community versus the pickleball already have existing norms and quite different geographies. Some are linked to the west, some are linked to the east, some based on the uniqueness of the amenities that they offer already have norms of how far they travel. So the survey would give kind of a general population, how do people feel about how long it is? This is the reason we put in the caveat about location, is where this will be, where it is and what's in it will be the two really important public conversations ahead, without question. And will public support and interest wane, and will there be new people mobilized to try to influence the design of the space? Of course, all of that is expected and normal and wonderful. A process to accommodate that through this joint empowered group is exactly what's imagined in the recommendation. So it's a long way of saying we could certainly crosstab and see how support changes based on current norms of travel. But my guess is the more useful answer would be like, for the hockey community, let's talk about this kind of a facility in this place. What would this mean? For the aquatics community, this facility in this place, what would that mean? And again, we're probably a couple of steps away from having the sort of certainty on those key decisions to be able to give you a precise answer to the question.
Thank you for that.
Nice answer.
It would be nice to have that assurance from those various communities, if you will, that they understand the timelines involved and they're still in support of it in the location proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ring.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. Getting back to the MOU, the report suggests that we create an MOU, and I agree wholeheartedly if we're going to do this as a joint project. I wonder if Colliers or either Kate or Dean could answer, what would your expected timeline be for us to get everything in order to get to the stage where we should be doing an MOU? The reason I'm asking is to kind of dovetail on Councillor Potts's questions on how long do we expect this to go before we make a decision, is because we've got a very good, capable steering committee put together, and they're going to bring a report back to us off of the recommendations on this report, and I think that has to be done before the town of Collingwood, anyways, or this council can make a decision on whether it's joint or individual. So, what kind of a time frame would your report think that we should have everything in order to at least sit down and talk about an MOU?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take a shot at that. Not to sound facetious, but how complicated do you want to make it? So, actually drafting the MOU, it's not that big of a deal. Like, this is an MOU to develop a business case, right? Sure, there'll be some terms that need to get resolved. More importantly, I think it's, the council's deciding that they want to proceed. So once we get motions through council, like the MOU could be drafted in parallel to, things coming forward to council. The MOU, it's not that big of a deal. The MOU for the business case for this stage of the project is not that big of a deal. I just want to clarify that.
Could I just add, Dean?
Yes, go ahead.
Just a gentle observation from kind of observing governance work in other communities. If you want to go fast, I would empower to a greater extent this joint body. The key question will be, how many decision points are there? Do both councils need to separately agree on every one of those big decisions, or are you creating a group that you empower with some thresholds to make a series of decisions and then just come back to you at those decision points? Where these things move quickly, often it's because there are clear, well-established, and fewer decision points that require maybe you want to know every decision. Maybe you just want to see, a few key decisions, and then of course the business case to vote on. So gentle advice would be, if the goal is to go fast, I would empower that group to make a number of decisions and then clear direction about bringing that back to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to follow up, please. And I understand what you're saying. And yes, I think everything has to be in place to what you both have mentioned and described. My concern was more of like, what would you expect the time frame to come back with you back to come up with because you've got you in your recommendations for this to get to the MOU, you're recommending that we have a joint committee at that point, which means to me both municipalities will have members on this joint committee to make recommendations back to both councils. My concern is, how much pressure are we putting on, say, Collingwood steering committee we have on place right now? Do we, do we give them 6 months, 3 months, 2 months? Like when we could, because as far as I'm concerned, maybe I'm the only one that thinks this, I'm gonna depend heavily on our steering committee with recommendations on how, even if we move forward. And I would like to know that before we even start talking about an MOU. So that's why I was trying to get to, what's the expected time before we sit down and try to negotiate an MOU?
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's a question that can be answered, but I'm trying to key on timelines here. How quickly we can move forward.
It has struck me that may be something we'll want to decide. Yeah. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. So I was going back and forth as the consultant was kind of describing the process, and I think, at least for the residents of Collingwood, potentially for Blue Mountains as well, the location will very much dictate whether the sentiment of whether they want to work together or not. I don't know which comes first. Do we want to work together and then go find something, or do we want to see the potential for the locations first and then decide who we want to work together with, and if this has opportunity in it. The other thing I'm sitting here thinking in terms of the distance of the location is how much we got out of the community feel of our community by moving those components that distance. So for me, that sense of community, what happens to that? And I was really surprised to see just in turn, we're going to really rely on the steering committee because we have so much strength and organizations represented there to be able to kind of move us forward. But we have a beautiful library. So, are we talking about a satellite library? Our library is so central to all our residents, and the third story is built for the capacity of an expansion into the third floor. I guess, again, that comes down to agreeing once we decide if we're working together what the components will be. But those are kind of my concerns at the point right now. And I do want to give the steering committee the time they need to really make a thoughtful recommendation to us in terms of moving forward. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And I think I'd just say that I do see useful information in here, and I will be studying it in more detail. And I too am going to be looking to the steering committee as a guide because they'll be getting into it in more detail as well. But I do want to say that I appreciate with staff and Colliers the presentation today. I'd only highlight that, in my opinion, I think we all share this, it's really a high level that we're looking at right here. And things like the pro forma, the funding, the challenges of working together, and we've pointed out those all need further work. I too think that we have to make a decision sooner than later because of the timing of everything. We're basically a year away from lame duck and that. So I also am of the opinion of what Councillor Jeffrey said, that we probably would need to kind of have an idea of what location we're talking about to really settle on whether or not we can do this as a together project. Also, there may be that situation where we decide that a facility in Collingwood is doing certain services and a facility in town of Blue Mountain is doing certain services. So there's that area. But I do appreciate the presentation. I think that there's useful information here, and I'd like to think that this just gets us going and going at a quick pace now to make those decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Yeah, I also very much appreciate having the opportunity to hear from our consultants today and hear the preliminary thoughts from our joint councils. To me, this will come down to location and funding. And honestly, how the funding's shared and split up and so on, that will come after we know how much it costs. So I'm hoping that I do agree with Councillor Jeffrey. The location will be everything, at least from what I'm hearing from residents in our town. And then once we have a location, I think that would be suitable, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, I'll just say, or more. How much it's going to cost, the share that would be each of our municipalities, how we could possibly fund that. I think then we could get into governance models, but I think, it's going to, the rubber's going to hit the pavement, so to speak, over money, as it always does. So those are my preliminary thoughts. And is there any more comments before we get into the confirmatory bylaw, Mayor Matusoff?
No, thank you. I think we've asked all of our initial questions, and there's no hand further up coming from staff. So I think we're good to move on to the confirmation bylaws. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll read ours first and look for a vote from our council, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mayor Matusoff, for yours. So Council here in Collingwood, the confirmatory bylaw is that the Town of Collingwood bylaw number 2025-063, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the joint special meeting held July 16, 2025, be enacted and passed the 16th day of July, 2025. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Potts, Councillor Ring, all those in favor, and that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. It's recommended that the Town of Blue Mountains bylaw 2025-42, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the joint special meeting held July 16th, 2025, be enacted and passed this 16th day of July 2025. May I ask for a mover? Moved by Councillor McKinley, and a seconder?
A second.
Seconded by Councillor Porter. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Chair Hamlin?
Thank you. So we're at the stage of looking for an adjournment, and so I have Councillor Jeffrey, who's our regular, has put her card up. So I'll now just seek a vote. All those in favor, and that seems to be unanimous around the table. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing each of you out having fun in our communities.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin, and to the rest of council, and thank you again to the presenters.